All right, everybody, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive, and today we are tackling developer relations DevRel, as the cool kids call it.
The cool kids.
Yeah, and we are diving into this awesome piece by Jared Reyes called Unlocking the Aha Moment, Developer Relations for Startups.
Great piece.
Yeah, and I really like Jared Reyes as a source because this is the guy who's been in the trenches building world-class developer relations teams at companies like Twilio off.
Yeah, big names.
So he's not just some guy who, read a couple blog posts and decided to, tell everybody else how to do it.
Yeah.
So when he talks, we should probably listen.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the most crucial things that he talks about in the piece is this idea of nailing that aha moment for developers.
Oh, I like that.
Right? Like you're piecing together this puzzle, right? And you're struggling, you're maybe questioning your life choices a little bit, and then bam, you find that missing piece and suddenly the whole picture just clicks into place.
Okay.
That, my friend, is the aha moment in the tech world.
I love that analogy, by the way.
It's that moment when a developer truly grasps the value of what you're building and they just get it.
Okay. Yeah. So, he gives some really cool examples in the piece too, right? Like Twilio, where the aha is I write a few lines of code and all of a sudden, ring, ring, I'm making a phone call through their platform, or Docker, where it's like, boom, I just containerized my entire application with a few commands.
Love it.
But what about for those of us out there that aren't building the next flashy tech unicorn? What if my product is not as inherently cool as controlling robots with your mind or something?
Right. Well, that's where things get, I think, a little bit more strategic and even more interesting, to be honest with you, because the piece breaks it down into 4 steps to identify what that aha moment is for any product.
Okay.
And he makes the point that it doesn't matter how complex the product is, you can follow these steps to figure it out.
Okay, so walk me through this. How do I figure out the aha?
So what is that one key action that demonstrates your product's unique value? So for your users, what gets them really excited? Are they trying to invite a team member to collaborate? Are they automating a workflow?
Okay.
You've got to figure out what that core thing is.
So it's like, instead of saying, hey, we sell lumber, it's like, no. We're going to show you how to build an amazing birdhouse with our lumber.
Exactly. You got it.
Show them the after picture.
You got to demonstrate the value.
Yeah.
Right? Not just tell them about the features. You got to show the value.
I like it.
And then once you figure that out, you got to streamline that user journey to get to that aha as fast as possible.
Right.
Measure how long it takes and try and optimize for speed and clarity to get there.
So are you saying this whole aha moment, that isn't just for developers, right? This is something that anybody who's listening can use.
100%. It applies to pretty much anything.
Yeah. This is making me think differently about even just a coffee maker. What's the aha moment when you're using a coffee maker?
For sure. It's that moment when you have that perfect cup of coffee and you're like, aha, this is exactly what I needed.
Okay, so we've got the aha moment down, which is huge. But then how do we get developers to not just experience it, but to become evangelists for it? They go out there and they tell everybody about it. Because that's the dream, right?
Right.
It's how do we bottle that up? That I just discovered this amazing thing and I need to tell everybody.
It's like capturing lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's where this idea of co-creation comes in that he talks about in the article. So we're talking about how do you transform early adopters into actual passionate advocates?
So instead of them just using your product, they're going out there and they're your marketing team.
Exactly. And he gives this really interesting example of Planet Scale and how they basically were able to build this community of early adopters that were so passionate, they essentially became their marketing team.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive, but that also sounds like a very high bar, especially for smaller startups out there that, we can't just throw these lavish hackathons every other week.
Sure. And I think that that's a little bit of a misconception because you don't need a huge budget or these big fancy events to tap into this idea of co-creation.
Okay.
He actually highlights this really interesting approach that's much more accessible and scalable called micro-experiments.
Micro-experiments. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the easiest way to think about it is imagine a chef in a kitchen, right? They're creating a new dish. Instead of waiting till the end of the meal to get feedback, they're constantly getting that real-time input as they cook.
Got it. Okay.
A little bit more salt, chef, or, oh, this sauce is incredible, right? So it's that same idea applied to software development.
Okay.
So you're fostering these direct one-on-one interactions between your engineers and the developers that are actually using the product.
Oh, I like that because it's like instead of this big formal feedback loop, it's like constant dialogue and back and forth,
Exactly.
which I imagine for the developers out there listening, they're probably like, yeah, man, like I want to be able to just shoot a message off to somebody and like,
Yeah.
be heard.
100%. Because it makes the developers feel heard. It makes them feel valued. They know that their input is actually shaping the roadmap of the product.
Okay, so great. We get buy-in from the developers. They're bought into this process. But how do we measure all this stuff?
Yeah, that's where those metrics come in.
Okay.
But again, we're not talking vanity metrics here, right? We're talking about real impact.
Yeah, nobody cares about vanity metrics anymore.
Exactly. So you want to track things like participation in these micro experiments.
Okay.
Are developers eager to get involved? Are they sticking around afterwards and continuing the conversation? And most importantly, how is that feedback influencing your product roadmap? Are you actually making changes based on what you're hearing?
So it's one thing to like, talk the talk, but you got to walk the walk.
Exactly.
Which I think brings us to another really critical piece here, which is developer experience.
Yes. And this is where I think a lot of companies go wrong. Right. They might nail the aha moment. They might have a really solid co-creation strategy in place. But if the actual experience of using the product sucks.
Right. It's like you buy that shiny new gadget, but then the instruction manual looks like it was written by like, somebody who doesn't even speak English.
It's the worst.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah, and especially with developer tools, it can be a deal breaker.
Yeah.
Developers have options.
Totally.
If your API documentation reads like ancient hieroglyphics, they're going to go somewhere else.
Right.
Or your SDKs are a pain to work with. They're just going to move on to a competitor that makes their lives easier.
So then what separates just like a good developer experience from like a truly exceptional one?
That's a great question.
I mean, the article mentions Stripe and Plaid as being kind of like, the gold standard.
Yeah.
So what are they doing that everybody else isn't?
I think what it comes down to is they've really made the developer experience a core part of their product strategy.
Okay.
It's not an afterthought, and it shows in every interaction that a developer has with their platform.
Yeah.
And I think it starts with really, really crystal clear documentation. And this is something that we've talked about before, but it's worth repeating.
Yeah.
I love that quote from Jacob Petrie, who led developer relations at Datadog and Stripe.
Oh, yeah.
He said, documentation is the front door, not the sales brochure.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Love that.
Okay.
Because it's so true.
Right. Like it's the difference between like, struggling with that IKEA manual and like actually coming out of it feeling like you're a furniture assembly pro.
Yeah, you got it. And that's the goal, right? We want developers to feel empowered like they can accomplish anything with our tools. And it goes beyond documentation, too. It's about offering those comprehensive SDKs across all the major programming languages.
Right.
So that everybody can get up and running quickly, regardless of what they're building.
Right. So it's like offering a recipe in both cups and metric,
Exactly.
whatever you're comfortable with. You got to meet developers where they are. And it also means building those bulletproof APIs that are reliable. They're predictable.
Yeah.
They just work.
Yes. And you can't forget the importance of like really responsive support, right?
Huge.
Have you ever, I feel like we've all been there, right? Where you're like trying to build something with a new tool and the documentation is so bad that you can't even figure out how to ask the right question.
Oh my God, it's the worst.
You're just like rage quitting and like throwing your computer out the window.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating.
It is.
And that's why having that robust and accessible support system is so critical.
Yeah.
To a positive developer experience.
Yeah.
But when it comes to measuring all of this stuff,
yeah,
especially for startups, forget about the fancy tools, right?
Okay.
Just get yourself a simple spreadsheet. Track your NPS scores,
okay,
your documentation rate, even the time it takes for developers to make that first API call.
Okay.
That's gold.
So you're saying like focus on the fundamentals first, like really nail those down before we start building out like this elaborate, developer portal with all the bells and whistles.
You got it, because it's so easy to get caught up in trying to do too much too soon.
Right.
Especially I find for startups, they're trying to make a splash and impress everybody.
Sure.
They're trying to be everywhere at once. And it's like, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall and just hoping it sticks.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
Right. And you end up spreading yourself way too thin and you lose your way.
So how do we avoid that then? How do we pick our spots and like really focus?
I think it comes down to understanding those early adopters, right? The ones that are already excited about what you're building.
Okay.
And really taking the time to analyze them. Like, who are they? What are their roles? What communities do they frequent? online and offline.
Got it. So like if we know that our ideal user is, all about, Python development, we're
Yeah.
going to like double down on the Python communities. We're going to be at all the Python conferences, right?
Exactly.
Not just like they're collecting business cards, but like we're presenting, we're engaged.
Yeah, you got to be
Ah.
present and engaged. And, to that point, if you're in a tech hub, own that local scene.
Oh, yeah. You
Yeah.
could be a big fish in a small pond for a little while.
Exactly. Build
Nice.
those deep, authentic connections.
Yeah, it's a community, not just a network.
100%.
Which brings us to, I think, like kind of the sexy topic du jour, which is open source.
Oh, yeah. Everybody's talking about open source.
Right. Is it hype or is it like actually a good strategy?
I think open source done right can be an incredibly powerful engagement engine.
Okay.
And he gives a really great example in the piece.
Okay, what's the example?
OSFO and their JWT tool. So if you're not familiar with JSON Web Tokens.
Yeah.
So they created this open source tool that is incredibly useful for developers working with JSON Web Tokens, and it subtly promotes their main product.
Okay.
So it's brilliant.
It's like giving away free samples, but the free samples are actually good.
Exactly. Get it.
Not like those ones at the grocery store where it's like one crumb of a cookie.
Exactly.
Like, no, this is like a whole delicious cookie. You're going to want to buy the whole bag.
So you can either open source a really genuinely useful part of your product or create some kind of related utility that your target audience is going to love.
Okay.
And the best part is it gets your engineers involved in the advocacy,
Yeah.
right? Because they get to showcase their expertise, their passion.
That's awesome. I love that. But how do we measure if it's working?
So again, it's about tracking those right metrics.
Okay.
So monitor things like the usage of your open source tools,
Okay.
the number of contributors, and most importantly, how it all connects back to your main product.
Right. Are people finding their way from our free thing to the paid thing?
You got it.
Okay. That's the magic flow.
I like it. All right, so we covered a ton of ground today.
I did.
For our listeners out there who maybe this is their first time really, thinking about developer relations, what's like the key takeaway? What should they be thinking about? I think the biggest takeaway is that DevRel, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
I like that.
You don't need a huge team. You don't need a massive budget to get started.
Oh, yeah.
Focus on embedding these principles within your existing teams because you're engineers. They are technical marketers.
That's a great point.
Focus on delivering that real value to developers, build those relationships, and those aha moments will follow.
It's all about the aha moment.
It's all about the aha moments.
I love it. All right, folks. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive.
It was a good one.
It was a really good one. We covered a ton. I feel like we could talk about this for another 3 hours.
Easy.
But we'll save it for another day.
Another day.
So from us here at the Deep Dive, thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.